In the 1970s, summer camp was defined by a specific kind of autonomy. Parents dropped their children off in the Oklahoma woods to learn self-reliance, often miles away from the nearest phone or paved road. We're opening the case files on a 1977 tragedy that forced a total overhaul of those expectations, an investigation that required 45 years of forensic advancement to reach a conclusion. On the first night of Camp Scott, 3 young campers, 8-year-old Lori, 9-year-old Michelle, and 10-year-old Doris, were assigned to Tent 7. Their unit sat at the farthest edge of the Kiowa campsite, secluded and partially hidden by the dense tree line. The camp's layout was designed to foster independence through physical distance. By placing the youngest campers in an isolated unit at the edge of the woods, the facility created a gap in supervision that a predator was able to exploit. A severe thunderstorm rolled over the camp that night, masking the sounds of the woods. Despite the rain, counselors reported hearing low guttural moans, and one spotted a dim flashlight beam moving between the trees before it suddenly vanished. At 6 a.m. the next morning, a counselor discovered the bodies of Lori, Michelle, and Doris on a trail 150 yards away from their tent. They had been moved from their unit and left in their sleeping bags near the camp road. The facility was evacuated immediately. All 140 campers were sent home, and the 50-year-old camp closed its gates that morning, never to host another summer session. By midday, the crime scene had overtaken the property. The property was eventually sold, marking the end of a long-standing local tradition and the beginning of a massive reevaluation of camp security across the country. Investigators found a trail of specific physical evidence left in the mud. They recovered a roll of duct tape, a partial boot print, a red flashlight, and a note found weeks earlier in a counselor's tent that had explicitly threatened the lives of 3 campers. The most promising lead was found on the red flashlight itself. Technicians managed to lift a single smudged fingerprint from the glass lens. That print pointed toward Gene Leroy Hart. Hart was a local Cherokee man and a convicted rapist who had escaped from prison 4 years earlier, and he was known to be hiding in the surrounding hills. Hart's criminal record showed a distinct pattern. In 1966, he had been convicted of kidnapping and assaulting 2 women before leaving them in a remote wooded area, a profile that aligned with the geography of the Camp Scott crime. Between the fingerprint on the flashlight and Hart's established history of woodland abductions, law enforcement focused their entire investigation on his capture. Tracking Hart across the rugged terrain of the Cookson Hills required a 10-month mobilization. State troopers and local authorities conducted a massive search through the brush, complicated by Hart's ability to navigate the remote wilderness. Hart was eventually captured in a small shack in April 1978. His arrest immediately created a divide. While police were certain of his guilt, many locals believed Hart was being targeted because of his past rather than concrete evidence. At the 1979 trial, the prosecution's case relied on the hair samples and the flashlight fingerprint. However, in an era before DNA sequencing, the defense argued that these matches were not definitive, and the forensic evidence was deemed circumstantial. The jury returned a not guilty verdict after only 5 hours of deliberation. Hart returned to prison to serve his remaining sentences for burglary and rape, but he died of a heart attack just 2 months later at the age of 35. The acquittal and Hart's sudden death left the case in a legal stalemate. Without a conviction or a living suspect, the investigation stalled, leaving the families with no further path toward a courtroom resolution. For decades, the biological evidence from Camp Scott sat in storage. As the years passed, the samples degraded, and it wasn't until the 2020s that forensic technology reached the sensitivity required to test such old material. This diagram shows the gap between the 1977 evidence and modern capability. While the biological samples lost viability over time, DNA sequencing technology advanced. Those two lines crossed with a 2022 breakthrough by the Mayes County Sheriff's Office. The results showed that the DNA was consistent with Hart's profile, leading authorities to state they are 99.9% certain he was the killer, effectively ruling out every other suspect or theory proposed over the last 40 years. While the science provided a definitive match, the case remains officially unsolved. Because the suspect is deceased and the evidence continues to degrade, the state cannot pursue a formal conviction, leaving the results as a matter of record rather than law. The fallout from these murders changed the requirements for childhood recreation. The era of total wilderness autonomy ended, replaced by mandatory background checks for staff and standardized security protocols at camps across the country. When the Girl Scout Council eventually opened a new camp, it included a secure, fenced-in sleeping area, partially funded by donations for a barbed wire enclosure. Visible physical security had become a requirement for families to feel safe sending their children into the woods. Behind these security changes are the specific lives lost. Lori, aspiring to be a doctor; Michelle, who was a curious reader; and Doris, known for her bravery. Camp Scott remains abandoned and overgrown, but the tragedy dictated how a nation protects its children in the outdoors, shifting the focus from total independence to constant, managed security.